I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. Wall Street leaders are changing their tune on President-elect Trump, but how will his presidency affect Americans' wallets? Well, joining me this week is my friend, Managing U.S. Director and Head of Research for the Eurasia Group, Jon Lieber. Jon, thank you for coming on Perino on Politics. This is the podcast where I call up my smart friends to find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. And today is Monday, the 16th of December. Is that right? No. Yeah, Monday the 16th. Yep. And over the weekend, last week and then over the weekend and even this morning, there are CEOs, especially from the tech variety, trying to establish a new or a better or repair relationships with President-elect Trump. Any thoughts on that as you advise people at Eurasia Group as to what all this means?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tech CEOs recognize that this is we're in a bit of a disruptive era in U.S. politics, and they need to get on the right side of the government. And the tech industry has been seen as an opponent of the Republican Party, an opponent of Donald Trump. You look at the donations of the tech companies, they largely skew towards Democrats. The partisan affiliation of most of those staffs skew towards Democrats, and the leadership tends to be Democratic as well. But suddenly you've got a president who's surrounding himself by people with expertise and knowledge in the tech industry and sending signals that he's going to do things differently. And that's a potentially fairly large disruptive threat to a lot of these companies. So, I think that they need to get right with the president. They need to recognize that he's won a totally legitimate election with a outright majority of the popular vote, and that they're going to be doing things his way from now on. And I think that represents a threat to their businesses, and they're smart to try to make friends.
The other thing I thought was interesting is this new trend that I've heard from a couple of people. You might know David Ulevich. Maybe I should get him on the podcast. He has an American Dynamism Fund at Andreessen Horowitz or Horowitz Andreessen, the fund.
Horowitz.
Anyway,
Yeah.
He said that there's this resurgence of young people, especially tech-minded young people, wanting to work for the government or at least be a part of the DOGE, the efficiency piece of all of this. And I was thinking about these tech CEOs. When they go down, it does send a signal to their workforces as well that says, we are going to be a part of the solutions here. We don't need to have people throwing up roadblocks. Like if you remember, DOD had the contract with Google. Was it DeepMind or something? And they decided a few years ago that those engineers just didn't want to work with the U.S. government anymore. And it does feel like that's changing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, so Mark Andreessen's made this point as well himself, which is about, you've got like a lot of young founders, a lot of young, smart tech people typically tend to be men that he's talking about who feel like they've been under attack by the left and under attack by at their universities. They've been under attack inside Google. And one way that they've responded is by kind of radically shifting over to the right. And now that Elon Musk, who's kind of the preeminent business technology leader of our time, has made it okay to support Trump and send out a signal that they're going to radically try to overhaul government and they want to attract some smart people coming in. You are seeing this flood of young, smart people willing to donate their time who are trying to approach these problems in a new way. Now, of course, the bureaucracy has a way of grinding young, smart people down. And I think it's an open question to me as how effective they can be, particularly from outside the government, particularly if they're not thinking about this from like a systemic change perspective or thinking about how to actually change the mind of lawmakers who, like it or not, are the ones who make decisions in this country. There's only so much disruption you can do as an outsider. But I do think it's an interesting data point that did not exist in the first Trump administration. Yeah. This energy coming into the government and this idea to reform everything.
I didn't do a good enough job of explaining to people why you're my friend. And I started pretty much my career with a little tiny stint in local news, but then went on to Washington, D.C. and worked on Capitol Hill. Did you start on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I started at a think tank and then I went to Capitol Hill on the Ways and Means Committee.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is great for me to ask you about this. So obviously, the number one issue for the election was the economy. The number one issue under the economy was inflation. And people feel upset understandably so, because the prices, especially of groceries, the things that they pay for every day, they've gone way up, and they're frustrated by that, and they were sending a signal. In your opinion, is there something that President Trump can do pretty quickly with a Republican Congress to try to deal with inflation, or is that a little bit out of their hands?
I think the challenge here is that what people are mad about is the price level. And the price level is not going down. Like it just, groceries have gotten more expensive, wages have gone up, cars are more expensive. Like things are more expensive.
Wages have not gone up as much though, right? Or
yeah, well, wage growth has been okay. It's been partially reversed some of those gains, but wage growth is not felt by everybody the same way inflation has been.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but my point is that the price levels have gone up and they're not going back down, but the rate of change, so the inflation rate has gone down. So prices were rising at 8% 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. They're rising at around 3% today. That's a big improvement in people's experience of kind of the rate of inflation, but price levels, what they're actually paying at the store, aren't going down. There's not much Trump can do to bring price levels down. What their mandate is and what the government should try to do is to keep the rate of growth of prices low and steady. Or the Fed's target is about 2.5%. You could argue that may be a little bit higher now at 3%. And that's what they should be targeting. And that's about where we are. So from a policy perspective, I don't think the Trump administration could or should do anything to bring prices down. But that's what people are mad about.
Right. Okay. So, but when he talks about more energy production, could that actually signal companies that their prices might come down in terms of delivering goods, so that perhaps prices go down that way?
Yeah, it could. So lower energy costs would help kind of, allow companies to make more with the resources they have. They make commutes cheaper. They make it easier to transit goods into the stores. But you're still unlikely to see those price levels going down at the store. Energy is just one component of the inflation metrics that everybody's watching. And even if they tend to be volatile anyway. Energy prices, they go up, they go down based on geopolitics, based on who's drilling more. And the U.S. could be doing a lot more to extract energy. But it's still unlikely to lead to, even if prices drop by $20 a barrel or something, it's unlikely to lead to a significant reduction in the overall prices that people are paying at the grocery store or at restaurants or whatever they're paying for.
I guess I'm trying to, I'm putting my press secretary hat on and thinking about expectations of the voters and what is actually possible in maybe the first 100 days on this issue. And I think it will just be hard. Maybe they just have to manage it through communications and talk about better days are coming, stick with us, your better jobs are coming, something. But I just feel like there's not some sort of magic bullet that you can fire to make all of this better.
Yeah. You look at what the Biden administration did, right? They targeted what they called greedflation. They said it was CEO's fault. They said that there was too much concentration in the grocery industry, and we're going to do things to make sure that, there's no more price gouging and all these things. They're really cosmetic Band-Aids. They fundamentally have nothing to do with the mismatch of supply and demand that leads to higher prices. And I don't think Trump, there's much he can do here. I think one of the big things he's probably going to do early in the administration is deportations, which actually should help on the wage side because it will make labor costs go up. That's one of the points, is to make labor costs go up for native workers. But that also does slightly exacerbate the inflation problem because it means that for commonly purchased goods like agriculture goods or grocery prices, that should put upward pressure there. So part of their agenda is a little pushes the other direction, where it actually should result in higher costs for consumers. And that could be a political problem for them in the next 12 months. Last
week, when Joe Biden gave a speech about the economy and his legacy, he was very specific in saying that the United States economy is doing great compared to those, maybe our peers around the world, and that therefore he deserves credit for that. Should we give him credit for that? Should I look at this and say, okay, that's a great point?
I'd say the economy is doing quite well, depending on which metric you're looking at. So now inflation's returning to its historical trend. Job growth is very good. The unemployment rate is quite low. People feel bad about the state of the economy, though. And I don't know, that's kind of a vibes thing. If you look at, one of the interesting things is to look at polling data on how people feel about the economy, and much of that has become very partisan coded. And by that, I mean when Trump wins, suddenly Republicans and Republican business owners report much higher consumer confidence, much higher business confidence about the state of the country, and Democrats suddenly feel a lot worse. So I don't know if there's anything Trump or Biden can get people. That might be one of the things I'd advise Trump to do, is try to make people feel good about the state of the economy.
Yeah.
You don't really do that with data. You do that with kind of a narrative. And I think that's an important thing. And that's something Trump's good at, too.
Yeah, and in fact, today, I believe, and we're on air, we're recording this in the 11 a.m. hour. He was going to give a speech about SoftBank doing a big investment in the United States. So I think that you will see some of this, which is that it's coming. I am bringing these things to you. But the other thing that's going to happen is the Trump tax cuts from 2017 are going to expire unless the Congress does something. So now the House and the Senate are gearing up, and it's going to be a big fight. And there's a lot of details that are going to go on in all of this. But from a 30,000-foot level, how should listeners to Perino on Politics think about the tax fight to come? What should they pay attention to?
You know, this tax bill, so in 2017, Trump and the Republican Congress passed a big tax reform. It did a large tax cut on the corporate tax rate, which is good for growth. It's good for American competitiveness. That was made permanent. It also cut taxes for nearly every American household. That was temporary. It expires at the end of 2025. What this is really about is extending those tax provisions. That actually shouldn't be that hard. It's something that most Republicans agree on. They want to keep taxes low on most Americans, but it's expensive and the U.S. has a big deficit problem. So that's going to be, I think, where a lot of the fight happens, is how do you either offset the cost of extending those tax cuts or do some budget gimmicks to mask the cost. For most of your listeners, it's not going to be a big deal. I mean, this is going to be something that gets a lot of political headlines. There will be some other unrelated provisions that travel along with it, which will probably focus on ways to increase economic growth. But the reality is that most people's tax rates aren't going to change that much from 2025 to 2026. The reason this matters is if Congress fails to act, then most people will see a tax increase. I think that's extremely unlikely to happen. And, you know, if you just zoned out for the next year and didn't pay attention to the news on this, you'd wake up in 2026 and you wouldn't know it happened.
Okay. Should the Trump team be prepared to deal with the typical attacks that are coming? They're already starting to come, that these tax cuts only favor billionaires?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's the Democrats' go-to line on this thing. And, you know, it's been incredibly effective, right? So what's interesting about the 2017 tax bill is it was the least popular, despite the fact it gave a tax cut to almost every American taxpayer, almost every American household. It was the least popular piece of tax legislation in 40 years. And that includes the Clinton tax hike. That includes the George H.W. Bush tax hike. And it's because the media was totally against it. And that's what you're going to hear about for the rest of the year. It's going to be about tax fairness and making the rich pay their fair share. And so, you know, I expect that, the media environment's a bit different than it was 7 years ago when these passed. So that the effect of that will be more muted. But yeah, that'll be the Democrats' go-to attack line.
Do you think that Republicans will pass a no tax on tips bill or make it a part of that tax cut bill?
I think they'll do something that looks like that. I expect there's going to be some type of they will be pushing for a benefit that they can actually point to, which actually helps middle class families. Part of that will be some very minor tax relief on overtime pay, on tip to income. I also think there's going to be an expanded child tax credit benefit as part of this as well. It is an idea that's picked up a lot of Democrats have been championing it for a long time. A lot of Republicans have been leaning into that as a way to show that they care, not just about corporations, but about working families. So I think that will be some small benefit coming out of this tax bill for many American households with kids. Okay,
and the last question in this segment, and you might say people do not need to worry about this. Mark Thiessen wrote last week about President Trump having the ability to do 2 reconciliation bills next year. This is about budgeting. Does that matter? And is that a good opportunity for President Trump to do something significant?
So it matters in the sense that it would allow Trump to do more things early. So you think about a big part of his campaign pledge has been increased energy production, cracking down on the southern border and doing more to kind of confront America's adversaries, China and Russia. So if they do 2 reconciliation bills, they could secure the southern border more quickly by putting more resources down there. They could try to extract more energy out of the ground and faster, and deploy more renewable fuel faster through permitting reform, which would matter. And they could also expand money on defense early. If they do 1 bill, it's probably going to be the end of the year as opposed to the beginning of the year. So, but you're looking at the 6 to 8 month time difference on these spending things. It's a bit in the weeds, and I would tell most people they don't need to think about this.
Okay.
But it's going to be inside the baseball, inside the beltway, big point of contention next year.
John, when I was press secretary and they started talking about reconciliation and honestly,
Yeah.
I would just look around for anybody in the administration that could brief about it that was not me, because I thought if I spend all of my time trying to get up to speed on this, I will have time for nothing else, and it won't matter in the end.
Yeah, I think this is a interesting dynamic, how things have evolved since you were press secretary, is that I think the general media focus on these types of super in the weeds process questions have become much more important, at least in people's minds, even though in reality it's about kind of it's how sausage is made. And most people really have better things to do with their time
than watching
sit around
that.
Thinking about
no one needs to see that.
No one needs to know. Just enjoy the sausage. Don't bother on the process.
Just put it in the stuffing. That's all we need. All right, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we're back with Perino on Politics. Jon Lieber is my guest. John, President Trump talks a lot about tariffs and utilizing tariffs to make things more fair for Americans. But there's a lot of different ways to think about tariffs. As a conservative kind of economist, I'm not an economist, but with an economic outlook that is usually more conservative, just with my upbringing and also just how I viewed the world since the mid-90s when I went to Congress, I don't love tariffs. I understand sometimes they work, but am I wrong? Are we in the new age where everyone is going to be for tariffs now?
No, so yes, we're in a new age where everyone is for tariffs. No, tariffs are still bad. They increase barriers to trade. They make things more expensive, and they introduce inefficiencies that are created by the government, who we have no reason to trust is doing things in our best interests, right? So the kind of economic management that governments like to do depends on who's in power and who's they're friends with and who's making donations. And none of that is stuff, if we're skeptical of concentrated economic power, we should be against tariffs. That said, where President Trump has totally upended the conversation around trade and access to global markets and foreigners' access to U.S. markets is the fact that the U.S. is not competing on a level playing field. So the idea that we should be lowering tariffs when everybody else is, that makes a lot of sense, because what you're doing is you're reducing frictions for international trade. You're allowing capital to flow to places where it can be used at its kind of efficiently, at its lowest cost. And then the other countries are producing stuff consumed by Americans that Americans enjoy. But that's the kind of fantasy textbook version of free trade. The reality is the U.S. has radically lowered barriers to capital flowing in, labor flowing in, goods flowing in, money flowing out. And other countries have not done the same. China being the biggest abuser of this. China being a country that stole American intellectual property, that deeply subsidizes industries that compete directly with U.S. industries. And what Trump is talking about is trying to level that playing field. And so I think that tariffs are a tool for leveling the playing field. Other countries' economies are so skewed in favor of government control that it's going to be hard to actually achieve that level playing field. And as a result, what we get is going to be a more managed economy and what we call industrial policy in the U.S. That's going to be managed by the government that Democrats and Republicans now seem to embrace. So, the orthodoxy on tariffs has changed. I think you could argue the orthodoxy on tariffs was wrong. But in its ideal form, yes, we should have free trade and tariffs are bad.
Do you think that any of these business leaders who are going down to have conversations with President Trump will have any success in trying to talk to him about it?
I think if I'm a business leader going down to talk to President Trump, I'm looking for ways that I can make sure my business or industry is advantaged by
exactly.
These tariffs, right?
That's the other way. Yeah.
So I think that we can't look to corporate America to be the advocates for free and open trade. You can look for them to do what's best for their businesses. Make sure you're putting tariffs on my competitors and not on me. what can I do to get my way out of this? And that's what you're going to get. And that's the problem. One of the major kind of political economy problems with this centralized control.
Fascinating. I'm actually going to be going to Argentina for a little vacation, and I was just seeing that the president of Argentina, who seems to be having some success with his economic reforms in Argentina, will be at Trump's inauguration.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's a libertarian, Javier Milei. He's been kind of shaking. I mean, Argentina is a country that's been in need of deep economic reforms, formerly one of the richest countries in the world that's been driven into the ground over the last half century because of mismanaged economic policy. And what he's trying to do is revamp the country and attract foreign capital and make it a good place to invest again. They have a huge problem with inflation. They need to stabilize that. And he's got big economic management challenges ahead of him. But so far, he's been doing really well. And he's become a bit of a darling on the American right because of his libertarian attitude towards economic policy.
Well, and I was reading this weekend, I think might have been in the Wall Street Journal, about how not only did he reduce government spending and all of these things, but on regulations, he did try to go after that part of the economy or the government that was, he thought, hurting the economy. And there was this person writing, I can't remember the name, was saying that that could also happen here in America with Doge. And I wanted to get your opinion about what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy want to try to do. Of course, I'm hopeful for all things. I want everyone to have more money in their pocket. I just know that reducing government spending is a very difficult thing. It's not that they can't do it. They will, but it's not going to be without some tears along the way for some people. And also, they've said they will not touch Medicare and Social Security. Well, that's great. I mean, fine. Okay, if that's how you want to approach it. But when I remembered looking at those pie charts and saying, well, then I don't understand. How are you going to squeeze that much savings out of non-discretionary spending? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think that's the challenge here. It's not that we lack for ideas of how to reform the government. It's not that we don't know which regulations are outdated or unnecessary or actually doing more harm than good. It's that the country has lacked the political will to do anything about it. And you could fire every federal worker who works on non-defense issues, and you probably wouldn't notice in the overall debt picture of the U.S. Because it's such a small portion of the overall spending, which, as you say, is largely on payments to retirees, Social Security, and taking care of senior citizens, Medicare. And if you're not willing to do anything about that, which I understand politicians aren't, Donald Trump is not. He said he's not going to touch it because they'll get voted out of office. So if Musk and Ramaswamy really want to make a difference, what they'll do is create space for political leaders to make cuts to popular programs. And I don't think that that's exactly what their mission is here. Now, that said, there's room for them to reform things, right? But they're probably on a smaller level. You look at, the NASA administrator is likely to be somebody that comes from a direct competitor to Boeing, which is a company with large contracts being held by NASA. That's a big threat to a large incumbent that has a very cozy relationship with the government and suggests they're going to do things in a different direction. Now, of course, Musk himself is also a competitor to Boeing and a NASA contractor. So there's a lot of room to do things differently in the government here. But I don't think it's going to be the types of things that fundamentally reform the government and put it on a path.
Could they bring some efficiencies out of even upgrading technology? I did see someplace Elon Musk saw some of the computers being used by the government and was mortified. Like, how do people do any work around here?
Yeah, but I mean, this is a conflict. This is I think it's really great to have somebody come in from outside the government who's got a fresh way of thinking. But there's civil service laws, and there are laws that are designed to help avoid corruption and conflicts of interest and all these things in the government that dictate why government contracts are written the way they are. And you can complain about them and say it's inefficient and we get bad software and it's not serving the taxpayer well, and all that's true. But those laws exist for a reason, which is that, government procurement, if you kind of do it in the dark, then you end up wasting money on fraud and abuse. So they're talking about getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. There's a legal system in place that's designed to avoid waste, fraud, and abuse. You could say that's not working, but you can't just come in and throw out all these legacy systems that dictate how the government has been built on for 30 years.
Right. So what could they do that would be positive if we're ending this segment on a high note?
Doge?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot they could do. I mean, I think there's, federal contracting reform, how we contract in DoD. There's a lot of ways.
Permitting as well. I mean, this sounds like a little bit of a dry topic, and I brought this up on the 5 the other day, and I could feel my colleagues like, ugh. But it is the place where you have so much inefficiency for permits, like let's say you're going to build a road or a pipeline, and the permitting process is sequential instead of being done consecutively. And NEPA, when I worked at the Council on Environmental Quality, they wanted to change the National Environmental Protection Act.
Yep.
Yeah. So the permitting situation is maybe something they could actually do?
Totally.
Okay.
And, the problem is there's a lot of choke points in the American system that makes it hard to do things. So our per mile construction costs for roads, for rail, for subway is way more than it is than in our European counterparts, who are very good at building things. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is NEPA. We've got expensive, inefficient environmental reviews that allow somebody who has some concern about the spotted lizard or whatever to slow things down by several years. We have union regulations that make things much more expensive. And because of this, we're not good at building stuff. It prevents the U.S. it prevents economic progress, and it makes it harder to fix obvious problems like the trains coming in and out of Manhattan that are a big bottleneck for the national economy. And those are big reforms that could happen. The Trump team started to do this in the first term. And I think this is the kind of thing that in a second 4-year term, you can make a lot of progress on, and where I think DOGE could potentially be quite effective.
They could accelerate that. Yeah, that's kind of exciting. I love talking about permitting. Get ready, kids. We're going to talk a lot about permitting. Just kidding. All right, Jon Lieber, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we're back with Perino on Politics. This is a short segment, Jon, where I just asked this question to my smart friends. What are you paying attention to right now that's on your radar that you've learned over the years? Pay attention to this or that so that you don't get caught unawares that might not be something I'm looking at right now.
I think that I don't know if this is on your radar or not, but I think one of the big interesting things from the second Trump election is the idea that we're in the middle of this political realignment.
I talked about that a lot.
Parties have become pretty ossified in recent years and even over the last several decades, where there's kind of the Republicans have been the party of business, the Democrats have been the party of labor, and that's really switching. And if you look at the coalitions, Trump won with the labor coalition, and Harris, a lot of her vote came from college-educated people living in the cities and in the suburbs. And that's a different type of alignment that creates new opportunities for future Republicans after Trump, if they can pick up on pick up the mantle of what he's been doing and run with it. And then the Democrats have to decide what kind of party they're going to be. So this political realignment could lead to a really radically different era of policies in the U.S. This is a long-term question. It's not something that's going to matter for this year. Yeah. But I think it's an interesting thing that I'm watching, and I want to, I think it'll play out in the policy selection of President Trump, the types of people that Democrats are running in 2026, and I think it could lead to a really different era in U.S. policy than when we've come to know.
I am fascinated by that, and that's a wonderful deep tease for the end of year Perino on Politics podcast. I'm going to be talking to Patrick Ruffini, and he works for Echelon Insights with our friend Kristen Silverberg, and he pays a lot of attention to this. Yeah. So doing like just a big picture, like where are we as when I first started, college-educated voters all voted Republican.
Right.
And now that's different.
Now totally flipped.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you are so interesting. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. And we'll see you again soon. Jon Lieber, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.